We're going to chat a little bit about a very interesting subject today. Dr. Patino's back in his office, and I'm here, and it's going to be about why people lie. Dr. Patino, could you explain why lying seems to be such an instinctual behavior for humans?
Oh my God. Lying is a common thing socially, and it's a common thing that we have evolved into. Um, and it's attached to the issue of survival, right? It's kind of part of the survival process, but it's very unique to humans. And it's very unique to humans because it goes beyond what other mammals do for survival, right? Other mammals survive by protecting themselves, they survive by hunting, they survive by protecting their little ones in usually very aggressive and sometimes protective ways. But we humans have grown up to use lying as a survival skill very much for self-preservation, to to be able to have some degree of standing and to avoid judgment, right? So the interactiveness have help us develop certain skills that are there for protection and in the long term can be adaptive or it can be terribly dysfunctional. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind.
So, as it's survival, how does that manifest in people's daily lives?
Well, you know, we lie in a lot of different ways, and I remember because I do forensic work and I have to go into court sometimes, and people have asked me, have you ever lied? And the answer to have I ever lied is yes, because every human has lied. I
Hmm.
mean, let me give you a self preservation, childish, very simple thing. Me being, I don't know, 8, 9 years old, right? And I take 2 quarters out of a shelf where my mother was keeping some money, right? And she caught me doing it and she asked me, why did you steal the money? And I said, I didn't steal the money, right? Instinctually, I just had to lie to
You borrowed it.
protect myself, right? But at the end, she knew I was lying, right? So we get trained into this kind of stuff. And sometimes it gets manifested in other ways, like white lies, right? For example, and I remember this white lie that it was never about self-preservation, but it was about social interactiveness and self and soothing for somebody else. Being a physician, being in an intensive care unit with a 9-year-old child that was burned 3 quarters of her body. And she asked me, when in one of those moments of consciousness, am I going to die? And I said, no, I was lying, right? I was lying in a very compassionate way because it served no purpose for me to say, yes, you're going to die, right? Why would I make those final moments so uncomfortable? And she did die, right? Now, I did talk to the parents before that, and I did tell them that their kid was going to probably not, most likely not survive this. So I wasn't lying to them. But there are certain circumstances in which lying becomes compassionate too. So there's where you see the adaptiveness of this, right? So, which kind of takes you to the other side of lying, which is the truth, right? Behind lying, there's a truth. And then you have to wonder in humans, what is the purpose of telling the truth,
Hmm. Building
right? So,
trust, social interactions. What do you think?
so,
Tell us.
so when you get into the issue of why am I telling the truth, I mean, basically, is because is a valuable feature of humanity, right? The truth is important, but the truth can be interpreted a lot of different ways. So when we talk about the truth, we're talking about society's truth, the cultural understanding of truth, and what it means to me, my truth, right? So it's not as black and white about lying and telling the truth. There's a lot of variations in the middle. Okay.
So as you said, survival mechanisms. So and sometimes to protect ourselves, basically the intellectual equivalent of hiding behind a bush. But it's also for social acceptance, correct? And then how does that
Absolutely.
play into it? So why do people lie to do that? It seems to me that telling the truth would be more beneficial for social acceptance than lying.
Well, you can get into social acceptance without defining social acceptance, right? So social acceptance becomes being part of, in that your behavior and your culture and your understanding of you makes you someone that is likable to be accepted into that group, right? Now, social acceptance is very tribal, right? So there are a lot of other issues, you know, in particular when lying becomes a negotiation in and between tribes. So we're getting back into history when the groups were smaller and they have to relate to each other and they have to maintain peace. There was a lot of lying going back, and I think that the underlying issue of lying in politics, what we'll talk about it later, has to do with that. It has to do with the connection between different tribes. So in modern life, in terms of modern society, we have a lot of issues in terms of, am I going to be socially accepted, right? So for example, if you belong to a certain group or a certain church group, a certain political group, and you want to mingle with the other groups, right? Sometimes you can't tell the whole truth, right? So one of the ways to acquire social acceptance is by lying. And I'm not supporting it, but that's how we humans relate, right? Now another way that we do a lot of social acceptance is on dating, right? And teenagers are bad about this, right? In terms of they feel that things are black and white. And so when you present yourself to a significant other that you want to conquer for a relationship, you may not tell the whole truth and you may lie, right?
Mm.
Let me give an example. When somebody tells you you fall in love and you tell someone, I'm going to love you forever, it's kind of a lie because you don't know. But it sounds nice, right?
It's a good intention.
The intention and the value is good, but the potential is bad. And that's something that happens a lot in business, right? They make promises we can't keep. Making a promise you can't keep is kind of a partial lie
In your
with
article,
with an ulterior motive.
in your article, you also mentioned that the fear of consequences as a motivating factor for lying. And I think we see a lot of that, like you said, being caught with your hand in the cookie jar or the piggy bank is an issue. So how does that manifest for? I mean, but for adults, again, for kids, we get it, right? But why do adults just so often do it? I had one of my people uh, run late for an event, and I called him up. I go, "What's going on?" Before I even asked what was happening, he obviously lied. Said, "Oh, flat tire." Like, there's no way you had a flat tire. You just forgot. But it was just, I mean, he no hesitation whatsoever to throw a fabrication my way. Why is that so much easier than telling the truth? Is it the fear of consequences that are pushing you,
Well,
or other?
it's kind of like a mixture. Yeah, it is a fear of the consequence of telling the truth, right? When in reality, when you're dealing with honest people, it's a lot better to tell the truth. Right? I fell asleep, my alarm clock didn't go off, and it happened to
Or
me
I
this
just
morning.
forgot. Right? It's
You
human,
know,
right?
it happened to me this morning. I normally up at
Oh
5:30
wow.
because I start sending information, and I wake up and I have to start sending information to my associates in terms of patients to see in the hospital. And it did cross my mind, because I normally send it around 6 o'clock. This was 6:35, so
Wow.
I know they're waiting for the information. It was very easy for me to think, I'm gonna tell them something, right? But the reality is that I just had to tell him, listen, I got up late. He's gonna be there in 10 minutes, and that's it. And now it's easy for me to say that because I'm in a position of authority, right? So they're not going to question me. Even if I told them that I had a flat tire, they're not going to do anything. So it is very cultural, but psychologically speaking, the fear of consequence creates a defense mechanism, right? This is a defense mechanism because you don't want your value as a reliable person questioned in that particular example. So you really want, in the professional legal sense, that people continue to recognize you. When in reality, this is a learned behavior, right? But I always tell people, and I tell my students, and I tell patients, and I tell my family, you have to be conscious of what you're doing, when you react that way. So before you say, I had a flat tire, you need to think for a couple of seconds before you give the answer, right? Because there's got to be a purpose for your answer. And the best way to manage that in terms of your fear of consequence is to really be honest. And I have to tell you, I've seen this in court when I'm doing forensic cases, when I see some people testifying in court. You start noticing, and this is what I do for a living in terms of psychiatry, I start noticing that the witness is starting to become defensive, right? When you start to become defensive, especially with personal issues, like an attorney asked me, have you ever lied? Your first reaction is to say no. But then I have to ask myself, why is the attorney asking me that question? And what purpose does it serve to say no? But sometimes, and attorneys are very skillful at this, they start asking you questions to catch you in a lie. They're purposely pushing you into a lie. And if you feel very afraid of consequence, like, did you pull the trigger, right? Your prints are in the trigger, and you say no. Well, how do your prints got? So when you start lying, okay, you already lost. So you need to understand that lying also has consequences. Okay, not the consequences of the behavior that led you to lie, but the consequences of lying, and that becomes particularly important in the legal environment and the medical environment. I always tell doctors when they're going to testify in court, never ever lie, right? If you made a mistake, accept the mistake. Okay, there may be some reasons why you made the mistake. Okay, because when people start asking you questions in the legal and the medical legal sense, they kind of already know the answer, right?
Well, isn't that the thing? And they tell lawyers, never ask a question you already don't know the answer to, right? So
Exactly.
you're just burying yourself. And it sounds like, in those same things, I mean, obviously the courtroom, but also in just relationships, right? How do lies, or how are they used to preserve and or destroy relationships? I mean, I think the latter part's pretty obvious, but in your article, you talk about how sometimes it preserves a relationship. How does that work?
Well, you see, some people would say, I'm lying because I'm withholding information, because the purpose of disclosing information is not going to be beneficial to anybody, right? Now, sometimes when you withhold information, they're basically telling you you're lying, right? And that's a fine line between telling the truth and withholding information. So what you have to be cognizant of, very, very alert, is to the fact of what is happening in the process. What is the movie like? You know, what is if somebody asks you a question, how come you so late here? How come you didn't get here at 10 and you were supposed to be here? You were supposed to be here at 10. It's midnight. What happened? If you start lying, it starts to show that you're lying to protect something.
Hmm.
So the issue is not the fact that you lie, but what are you trying to withhold? Yeah,
But what are you valuing more?
exactly. So what happens in circumstances of important relationships is that it's not the truth as much as the trust, right? That is valuable. So you have to be very careful about what you say that may affect trust. So sometimes we end up protecting ourselves, we're protecting ourselves from the consequences, and we disregard the trust, right? So there's some people, not a lot of people, but there's some people in our lives that we have to be very careful on how we may affect trust. And sometimes sacrificing your persona, sacrificing your self-image, sacrificing your uh, being punished is better than losing the trust of somebody you care for.
Hmm. You know, I can understand that a lot when it comes to relationships, but when it comes to just general social interactions, as you know, I worked in another place where ego and self image is pretty much central to a lot of things that occur out there. So you brought that intriguing point up in also your writing. How does image management, I guess that's the term that we're using, contribute to people's deceptive behaviors? And of course, yeah, I'm leading into our ultimate question about certain things in our current political uh, sphere, but let's talk about image management for a minute. What is
Well,
that?
image,
Why do people? Why are they so? It's just completely wrapped up in that in our current society.
I grew up in the 60s, 70s, professionally in the 80s. So that was a long time ago. You did too in some of those years. And back in those days, we care about our image. Okay. But creating an image was a much difficult and arduous work. You had to work very hard. So there's not a lot of people that were extremely concerned about the image. And then there were the rest of us, right? So we had the popular crowd, the good looking guys, the good looking girls, the athletes, and so on, that had an image to protect. And the rest of us kind of navigated that process. Some people like it, some people didn't like it, but there was a lot of balance, right? Nowadays, with the advent of social media, it sounds like everybody has to protect an image, right? And that creates a multitude of problems. One of the major problems is the requirement of having to maintain the image for everybody, right? And to make sure that nobody's damaging it. So
Mhm.
that makes you a lot more vulnerable and using your adaptiveness, online, right? So trying to pretend you're somebody nobody knows. Now, media protects you from that because you don't have to interact on a one-to-one basis, right? Um, I remember when I was going to school, I was kind of in a private school, somewhat middle class. There were some people that have a lot of money, some people did not have any money. It was kind of in the middle. And I remember one time that I was very embarrassed, because it was after Christmas, and I didn't want anybody to know that I was wearing a new jacket, right? So I go to school. I must have been in the seventh, eighth grade. So I'm wearing my new jacket, and somebody tells me, "I like your new jacket," and I said, "It's not new, right?" So I lied,
Hmm.
and then he says, "Well, you still have the tags on it, right?" So you see, that was I didn't want other people to know I had a new jacket because there were people who didn't have new jackets, right? So I didn't want to show off my jacket, and I want to pretend I didn't have a new jacket. It would have been a lot easier, yeah, to say, well, I'd like it too, it's new. So you see, nowadays you don't have to show the
Mm.
tags. You don't have to show anything. You don't even have to show your face, right? To maintain an image. So that forces you to be more vulnerable to attacks, more vulnerable. So there's a lot of, and I see it because I treat adolescents in the hospital. I still want to kill themselves because somebody is damaging their image, right? So
Wow.
those are things that if the kid is vulnerable, the kid has issues with personality or depression, and they're constantly trying to maintain an image, that's very stressful. So the level of stress that kids are dealing with today is very different and much more difficult to manage than what we dealt with many years ago.
Interesting. Wow, really to that extreme that they want to end their lives. That's can't get my head around that. Of course, our final question for the evening, and I have to bring it up. In our political world now, we have what I think is the ultimate example of the adult liar in Donald Trump. Um, and what's so frightening to me about people like him, and it has been my whole life, I'm just one of those people, I don't lie very much, is to watch the benefits that these people get from these just ridiculous, obvious deceptions. What's going on? Right? I mean, because lying is a two-way street, right? You have to have the person giving the lie, at least a minimum two-way street, and you have to have the other person accepting the lie. It just blows my mind when I see this.
Yeah, I mean, you see what happens in politics and on people that have certain degree of sociopathic charisma. And I have to say, let me disclose, Donald Trump has never been my patient, and Paul is never going to be my patient, and it may not be the patient of anybody. So I can't speak for any pathological issues, but I can speak for what I see in terms of interaction from him and the people around him and the people that follow him. And it is the whole dynamic of in society is a typical dynamic of cultism, right? And to have a cult, you have to start with a lie, right? You have to start with the idea of something that is not true, but it can be promised. Okay, so it's like the exaggeration of the love lie, right? Is that if you believe in me, I'm going to give you all of this forever. You have to have certain degree of charisma, but you also have to have knowledge and purpose on controlling and manipulating, right? So what we see is, in the sad part is that it's not the lie itself, it's the fact that people kind of spiritually follows the lie with distortion and and totally giving themselves to the cult, right? Now that can be very dangerous, right? Because it's very difficult to undo.
Mm.
Because in order to maintain a cult, it has to be a constant recirculation of lies, right? So the cult is the ultimate manifestation of a societal distortion, okay, that make it religious tense. And I'm not talking about religion in terms of Christianity or Semitism or anything like that. I'm talking about purely the idea of a bigger thing or a bigger person that is going to give us something, in return. So it's basically,
The deification of a person, which just really recently happened with the release of that video, where the one group was saying that God made him to save us. It's incredible.
well, and you see, that's a distortion of faith and how you abuse faith, right? The idea, and this is mostly in the United States in some radical Christian circles, that Donald Trump is the new Messiah. I mean, that's basically how they're
Mm,
speaking about that.
absolutely, yeah.
I mean, and not only people in general within those religions, but people in Congress, right? In terms of being blinded to the consequences of lying at a societal level, right? And the abuse for individual and collective purposes of those followers. So, my concern as a psychiatrist and a social scientific person in terms of how groups behave, for me, it becomes very important to recognize that all the cults that I know, okay, that did not transform into well organized religions, because all religions started like a
Started as a
cult.
cult, yeah.
So the ones that did not survive, most of them have either killed a lot of people or have become very damaged. And it becomes very difficult to help those people. Because if you think about what we talked about before, self-image, fear of consequence, not believing the lie, okay, is more damaging for them in terms of maintaining the self-image and their sense of value than continue believing it.
Mm. Well, very fascinating topic, Doctor. I'm sure we'll talk more about it. And you'll be publishing the article, I believe, in the next day or two. So, for
Yeah.
those of you who want to read additional information on this, please do. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.
Hey, we'll see you soon. Okay.